What was to you kind of the darkest moment of what was the hardest stumbling block to get over on the engineer side? Like, was there any time where there's a doubt where it's like, I'm not sure we'll be able to do this? A kind of engineering challenge that was hit. Do you remember anything like that?
I think the one that my colleague at MIT, Ray Weiss, worked on so hard and was much more of a worry than this. This is only a question if you not do it well enough, you have to keep making it better somehow.
Right.
But this whole huge instrument has to be in vacuum.
Right.
And the vacuum tanks are, this big around. And so it's the world's biggest high vacuum system. And so how do you make it, first of all? How do you make this 4-meter long sealed vacuum system? It has to be made out of
4 kilometers long.
4 kilometers long. Would I say something else?
Meters.
4 kilometers long.
Big difference.
Yeah. And but to make it, we started with a roll of stainless steel, and then we roll it out like a spiral so that there's a spiral weld on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the engineering was fine. We did that. We worked through very good companies and so forth to build it. But the big worry, it was, what if you develop a leak? This is a high vacuum, not just vacuum system. Typically in a laboratory, if there's a leak, you put helium around the thing you have, and then you detect where the helium is coming in. But if you have something as big as this, you can't surround it with helium.
So you might not actually even know that there's a leak, and it will be affecting.
Well, we can measure how good the vacuum is, so we can know that. But a leak can develop, and then we don't. How do we fix it, or how do we find it?
Gotcha.
And so that was, you asked about a worry. That was always a really big worry.
What's the difference between a high vacuum and a vacuum? What is high vacuum? That's like a delta of close to vacuum. Is like some threshold?
There's a unit. High vacuum is when the vacuum in the units that are used, which are torrs. There's 10 to the minus 9.
Gotcha.
And there's high vacuum is usually used in small places. The biggest vacuum system, period, is at CERN in this big particle accelerator. But the high vacuum, where they need really good vacuum so particles don't scatter in it, is smaller than ours. So ours is a really large high vacuum system.
I don't know. This is so cool. I mean, this is basically by far the greatest listening device ever built by human. The fact that like descendants of apes could do this, that evolution started with single cell organisms. I mean, is there any more? I'm a huge theory is like, yeah. But like bridges, when I look at bridges from a civil engineering perspective, it's one of the most beautiful creations by human beings. It's physics. You're using physics to construct objects that can support huge amount of mass. And it's like structural, but it's also beautiful, and that humans can collaborate to create that throughout history. And then you take this on another level. This is like exciting to me beyond measure that humans can create something so precise.
But another concept lost in this, you just said.
Yeah.
You started talking about single cell.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to realize this discovery that we made, that everybody's spot off on, happened 1.3 billion years ago, somewhere. And
Right.
then the signal came to us. 1.3 billion years ago, we were just converting on the Earth from single cell to multi-cell life. So when this actually happened, this collision of two black holes,
Yeah.
we weren't here. We weren't even close to being
We're both
here.
developing
There were
slowly.
we're going from single cell to multi-cell life at that point.
All to meet up at this point.
Yeah.
Wow, that's like that's almost romantic.
It is.
Okay, so on the human side of things, it's kind of fascinating because you're talking about over 1,000 people team for LIGO.
Yeah.
They started out with around 100, and you've for parts of the time at least led this team. What does it take to lead a team like this? of incredibly brilliant theoreticians and engineers, and just a lot of different parties involved, a lot of egos, a lot of ideas. You had this funny example, I forget where in publishing a paper you have to all agree on like the phrasing of a certain sentence or the title of the paper and so on. That's a very interesting, simple example. I'd love you to speak to that, but just in general, what does it take to lead this kind of team?
Okay. I think the general idea is one we all know. You want to get where the sum of something is more than the individual parts, is what we say, right?
Yeah.
So that's what you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
Okay. How do you do that, actually? Mostly, if we take multiple objects or people, I mean, you put them together, the sum is less.
Yes.
Why? Because they overlap. So you don't have individual things that, this person does that, this person does that, then you get exactly the sum. But what you want is to develop where you get more than what the individual contributions are. We know that's very common. People use that expression everywhere. And it's the expression that has to be kind of built into how people feel it's working. Because if you're part of a team and you realize that somehow the team is able to do more than the individuals could do themselves, then they buy on, kind of, in terms of the process. So that's the goal that you have to have, is to achieve that. And that means that you have to realize parts of what you're trying to do that require, not that one person couldn't do it. It requires the combined talents to be able to do something that neither of them could do themselves. And we have a lot of that kind of thing. And I think, build into some of the examples that I gave you. And so how do you then, so the key almost in anything you do is the people themselves, right? So in our case, the first and most important was to attract, to spend years of their life on this, the best possible people in the world to do it. So the only way to convince them is that somehow it's better and more interesting for them than what they could do themselves. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of this idea.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's powerful. But nevertheless, there's best people in the world. There's egos. Is there something to be said about managing egos?
That's the human problem is always the hardest. And so that's an art, not a science, I think. I think the fact here that combined, was a romantic goal that we had to, do something that people hadn't done before, which was important scientifically and a huge challenge. Enabled us to say, take and get, what we did, just to take an example, we used the light to go in this thing comes from lasers. We need a certain kind of laser. So the kind of laser that we used, there were 3 different institutions in the world that had the experts that do this, maybe in competition with each other. Mm-hmm. So we got all 3 to join together and work with us to work on this as an example, so that you had, and they had the thing that they were working together on a kind of object that they wouldn't have otherwise, and were part of a bigger team where they could discover something that isn't even engineers. These are engineers that do lasers. So, and they're part of our laser physicists. And
so could you describe the moment or the period of time when finally this incredible creation of human beings led to a detection of gravitational waves?
It's a long story. Unfortunately, this is a part that we
Lots
started.
Of failures along the way, kind of thing, or what?
All failures. That's all. It's built into it.
Okay.
If you're not
mechanical engineering,
you build on your failures. That's expected. So We're trying things that no one's done before. So it's technically not just gravitational waves, and so it's built on failures. But anyway, we did, before me even, the people did R&D on the concepts. But starting in 1994, we got money from the National Science Foundation to build this thing. It took about 5 years to build it. So by 1999, we had built the basic unit. It did not have active seismic isolation at that stage. It didn't have some other things that we have now. What we did at the beginning was stick to technologies that we had at least enough knowledge that we could make work or had tested in our own laboratories. And so then we put together the instrument. We made it work. It didn't work very well, but it worked. And we didn't see any gravitational waves. Then we figured out what limited us, and we went through this every year for almost 10 years, never seeing gravitational waves. We would run it, looking for gravitational waves for months, learn what limited us, fix it for months, and then run it again. Eventually, we knew we had to take another big step, and that's when we made several changes, including adding these active seismic isolation, which turned out to be a key. And we fortunately got the National Science Foundation to give us another couple $100 million, $100 million more, and we rebuilt it, or fixed, or improved it, and then in 2015 we turned it on, and we almost instantly saw this first collision of two black holes. And then we went through a process of, do we believe what we've seen?
Yeah, I think you're one of the people that went through that process. It sounds like some people immediately believed it.
Yeah.
And then you were like...
So as human beings,
skeptical.
we all have different reactions to almost anything. And so quite a few of my colleagues had a eureka moment immediately. I mean, it's
amazing.
The figure that we put in our paper first is just data. We didn't have to go through, fancy computer programs to do anything. And we showed next to it the calculations of Einstein's equations. It looks just like what we detected.
Wow.
And we did it in two different detectors halfway across the U.S. So it was pretty convincing, but you don't want to fool yourself. So we had being a scientist, we had to go through and try to understand that the instrument itself, which was new, I said we had rebuilt it, couldn't somehow generate things that look like this. That took some tests. And then the second you'll appreciate more, we had to somehow convince ourselves we weren't hacked in some clever way.
Cybersecurity question.
Yeah. Even though we're not on the internet, but
yeah. No, it can be physical access too. Yeah, that's fascinating. It's fascinating that you would think about that. I mean, not enough. I mean, because it matches prediction, so the chances of it actually being manipulated is very, very low. But nevertheless,
we still could have disgruntled old graduate students who had worked with us earlier
who want you to, I don't know how that's supposed to embarrass you. I suppose, yeah, I suppose I see. But about what I think you said, within a month, you kind of convinced yourself sufficiently.
Within a month, we convinced ourselves. We kept 1,000 collaborators quiet during that time. Then we spent another
That's funny.
month or so trying to understand what we'd seen. So that we could do the science with it instead of just putting it out to the world and let somebody else understand that it was two black holes and what it was.
The fact that 1,000 collaborators were quiet is a really strong indication that this is a really close-knit team.
Yeah. And they're around the world. Or either strong knit or tight knit, or had a strong dictatorship or something.
Yeah, either fear or love. You can rule by fear or love.
Yeah,
right.
right.
We can go back to Machiavelli.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is really exciting that was that's a success story, because it didn't have to be a success story, right? I mean, eventually, perhaps you could say it'll be an event, but it could have taken it over a century to get
Oh
there.
yeah. It's and it's only downhill now. Kind of.
What do you mean? It's only you mean with gravitational waves?
Well,
Like, it's
we've now we now well, now we're off because of the pandemic. But when we turned off, we were seeing some sort of gravitational wave event each week.
yeah.
Now we're adding features where it'll probably be, when we turn back on next year, it'll probably be every couple days. And they're not all the same. So it's learning about what's out there in gravity instead of just optics. And so it's all great. We're only limited by the fantastic thing, other than that this is a great field and, it's all new and so forth, is that experimentally, the great thing is that we're limited by technology and technical limitations, not by science. So another really important discovery that was made before ours was what's called the Higgs boson, made on the big accelerator at CERN. At this huge accelerator, they discovered a really important thing. It's, we have Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. So energy makes mass, or mass can make energy, and that's the bomb. But the mechanism by which that happens, not fission, but how do you create mass from energy, was never understood until there was a theory of it about 70 years ago now. And so they discovered it's named after a man named Higgs. It's called the Higgs boson. And so it was discovered. But since that time, and I worked on those experiments, since that time, they haven't been able to progress very much further. A little bit, but not a lot further. And the difference is that we're really lucky. We're in what we're doing, in that there, you see this Higgs boson, but there's tremendous amount of other physics that goes on, and you have to pick out the needle in the haystack kind of physics. You can't make the physics go away. It's there. In our case, we have a very weak signal, but once we get good enough to see it, it's weak compared to where we've reduced the background. But the background is not physics. It's just technology. It's getting ourselves better isolated from the Earth, or getting a more powerful laser. And so since 2015, when we saw the first one, we continually can make improvements that are enabling us to turn this into a real science, to do astronomy, a new kind of astronomy. It's a little like astronomy. I mean, Galileo started the field. I mean, he basically took lenses that were made for glasses, and he didn't invent the first telescope, but made a telescope, looked at Neptune, and saw that it had 4 moons. That was the birth of not just using your eyes to understand what's out there. And since that time, we've made better and better telescopes, obviously, and astronomy thrives. And in a similar way, we're starting to be able to, crawl, but we're starting to be able to do that with gravitational waves. And it's going to be more and more that we can do as we can make better and better instruments. Because, as I say, it's not limited by picking it out of others. Yeah, it's not limited by the physics.
So you have an optimism about engineering that as human progress marches on, engineering will always find a way to build a large enough device, accurate enough device to detect the signal.
As long as it's not limited by physics, yeah, they'll do it.